July 10, 2023. A blue Subaru Outback pulls into the gravel parking lot at Mowich Lake Trailhead, engine ticking softly in the mountain air. Daniel McCrae, 42, steps out, stretches, and helps his daughter Sophie unbuckle from the back seat. She's 10 years old, wearing a faded bird-watching vest and carrying a tiny pair of binoculars. They're here for a weekend in the woods, just the two of them. No cell service, no distractions, just silence, sky, and forest. The forecast is perfect. Blue skies, mid-70s, no storms in sight. Daniel is no amateur. He's a former Army medic, trained in wilderness survival, and a well-loved member of his Tacoma community. Neighbors say he doted on Sophie, took her hiking every month, rain or shine. Their trip to Mount Rainier National Park wasn't a surprise. It was a tradition. They signed no backcountry permits, left no itinerary, told no one exactly where they were going, just Mount Rainier. That was it. A routine weekend escape in nature. But this time, they never came back. On July 12th, Daniel's sister grew concerned. She called his phone, straight to voicemail. She messaged his ex-wife. No response. By the evening, she drove to his house. The lights were off, mail untouched. Sophie's cat meowed at the door. By July 13th, the Subaru was found, still parked neatly at Mowich Lake. Nothing looked wrong. No broken glass, no flat tires. Inside, Daniel's glove box was locked. Sophie's water bottle sat in the cup holder. Her favorite birding book lay face down in the back seat. The car was a capsule of unfinished plans. Search and rescue teams were dispatched within 12 hours. Dogs, drones, rangers, helicopters skimmed the treetops. But the vastness of the wilderness swallowed them whole. No tracks, no campsite, not even a discarded wrapper. It was as if father and daughter had stepped off the trail and into the trees and vanished. No call, no note, no trace. What began as a summer weekend in one of America's most iconic parks was now something else entirely. A father and daughter had disappeared without a sound. And Mount Rainier wasn't giving them back. Before he vanished, Daniel McCrae was many things. A single father, an Army veteran, an outdoorsman. Friends described him as meticulous, a planner, the kind of guy who brought backup batteries for his flashlight and memorized topographic maps for fun. After leaving the military, he worked as a nurse in Tacoma, quiet, dependable. But his real peace was in the wilderness. He'd taken Sophie camping since she was 5. She loved it, especially the birds. Bald eagles, woodpeckers, chickadees. She could name them all by their calls. Sophie had a journal she called her field log, where she drew sketches and logged every species she spotted. Her dream was to become a wildlife biologist. She was 10 years old and already knew how to identify more birds than most adults ever would. The plan was simple: drive out Friday, hike to Tolmy Peak Lookout, and camp near Eunice Lake. It's a 5.6-mile round-trip hike, moderate, scenic, with sweeping views of Mount Rainier and the deep blue basin below. Daniel had done it before. He knew the route, knew the terrain. It wasn't supposed to be risky. Their last confirmed sighting came from a Chevron station 40 miles from the park. Surveillance footage shows Daniel paying for gas and snacks, trail mix, marshmallows, and 2 packets of hot chocolate. Sophie spins slowly in the candy aisle, pointing at gummy worms. Both are smiling. They weren't running. They weren't hiding. They were preparing for a memory. What the footage didn't capture was what happened next. Whether they stayed on the trail or deviated, whether they made it to the lookout or took a wrong turn. The trail map Daniel carried was found later, creased, water-damaged, and oddly marked in a way that didn't match official routes. But that wouldn't come to light for over a year. What is known is this: they checked into nothing, no campsites, no ranger stations. Their names appear on no logs. As the sun began to dip on that Friday evening, Daniel and Sophie were somewhere on the slopes of Mount Rainier. The golden light poured through the evergreens. Their footprints, if they left any, were already fading into moss and pine. And somewhere ahead, something waited that neither of them could have prepared for. July 12, 2023. Daniel McCrae and Sophie were now 2 days overdue. Daniel's sister, Lauren, had tried to give it time. He'd gone off-grid before, sometimes not responding for a day or two while hiking. But Sophie always called her mom by Sunday night. This time, no one had heard from either of them. Lauren made the call to 911. By midday, a park ranger was dispatched to check known trailheads. Mowich Lake Trailhead was the first stop. There it was, the blue Subaru Outback, parked just as it had been on July 10th. Undisturbed, no signs of struggle, no broken windows. The doors were locked. It looked like a car waiting for its owner to return from a day hike. Inside the vehicle, nothing seemed unusual. Daniel's hiking boots were gone. Sophie's fleece jacket was missing from the back seat. But her field journal was still in the car, tucked neatly under a paperback book about Washington state birds. Her small purple backpack was missing, too, likely with her. No obvious signs of foul play, no blood, no disarray, but no clues either. The authorities treated it as a standard overdue hiker report. Nothing urgent, not yet. They logged the discovery and scheduled an initial sweep of the trail that evening. But the tone changed quickly. Rangers noted no campsite registered to Daniel's name, no wilderness permit pulled. He hadn't checked in with any ranger station. There was no planned route filed with friends or family, no breadcrumb trail, just a car and a name. Calls were made. Helicopter support was requested. 2 deputies from Pierce County arrived and began speaking to park staff, but no one had seen the McCraes. No campers reported encounters, no sightings. No trail cameras picked them up at junctions. It was like they'd walked into the woods and never came back out. Missing persons reports were filed by nightfall. Sophie's age elevated the urgency. Rangers printed her school photo, laminated it, and pinned it to the trailhead sign alongside a notice. Missing 10-year-old girl and father, last seen July 10th. As darkness crept across the treetops, search crews prepared to spend the night on the mountain. Flashlights, radios, K9S. The hunt had begun. What no one could understand yet was how the forest had already buried the truth, and whether it ever planned to give it back. Dawn broke over Mount Rainier in a wash of gray. Low clouds clung to the ridgelines like gauze, softening the sharp edge of the wilderness. At 6:05 a.m., the first team of park rangers set off from Mowich Lake Trailhead, boots crunching gravel, eyes scanning for anything, footprints, discarded gear, broken branches. The air smelled like wet pine and something heavier. Rain was coming. By mid-morning, the operation expanded. K9 units arrived from Pierce County Search and Rescue. 2 helicopters deployed from Joint Base Lewis McChord buzzed overhead, their rotors echoing through the valleys. The search focused on the Tolmy Peak Lookout Trail, the most likely route based on the car's location. It's a popular hike, but parts of it narrow into steep switchbacks with heavy drop-offs. If someone slipped, it could mean a fall hidden from view, concealed by dense forest. But nothing, no trail disruptions, no snap branches, no snack wrappers, no signs of distress. Rangers checked the usual camp spots near Eunice Lake. Empty. They combed the shorelines, peeked into rocky outcrops, called names into the woods. "Daniel! Sophie!" The only response was wind and the occasional flap of bird wings overhead. Then the weather turned. By 1:42 p.m., the sky darkened. A sharp wind cut through the trees. Cold mountain rain began falling, fast. Fog rolled in, reducing visibility to under 30 feet. What had started as a warm summer morning now felt like something else entirely, something darker. Searchers huddled under ponchos, trying to keep their maps dry. The helicopters were grounded. Radios crackled with static. The woods swallowed everything. Despite it all, they pushed on. Grid searches extended beyond the trail, 300 feet into the underbrush. Dogs worked tirelessly, noses low, tails stiff. But by sundown, the report was grim. No campsite, no gear, no clothing, no scent trail. It was as if the forest itself had closed behind the McCraes. Veteran rangers began whispering what no one wanted to say out loud. "Too clean," one muttered. "Too quiet." They marked the search area and pulled back for the night. But the rain didn't stop. It fell steadily through the night, soaking every log, washing away footprints, and silencing whatever clues the forest might have left behind. The mountain was already erasing them. By July 14th, the story had spread beyond the woods. Local news ran the headline first: "Father and daughter vanish in National Park." It was simple, stark, and just ambiguous enough to grip a reader's throat. By the end of the day, it had gone national. Cable news cut to drone footage of Mount Rainier's cloud-wrapped peaks. Anchor voices painted the scene: decorated Army medic, loving father, young daughter with a passion for birds. Missing without a trace, a family hiking trip that ended in silence. Then came the speculation. Social media lit up with armchair detectives. Reddit threads exploded. YouTube creators rushed out mystery and Mount Rainier videos within 48 hours. Some theories were innocent. Daniel and Sophie got lost, turned around, ran out of supplies. But others went darker. Bear attack, abduction, murder-suicide, voluntary disappearance. One viral post insisted Daniel had debts and faked his death. Another claimed Sophie was spotted in Idaho with a bearded man near a rest stop. A woman on TikTok swore she recognized Sophie from a campground in Utah, until it turned out to be a different child entirely. Tips poured in, dozens of them, none credible. A man in Spokane said he saw a man matching Daniel's description at a gas station on July 13th. Surveillance footage proved it wasn't him. A hiker claimed he found a child's shoe 10 miles from the last known location. Turned out to be decades old. Even a self-proclaimed psychic emailed the FBI saying Sophie was alive and in the presence of trees that whisper. Authorities followed every lead. They had to. But each one brought them back to the same place: a parked car, an empty trail, a mountain with too many places to hide the truth. Meanwhile, Sophie's photo went viral. Brown eyes, shoulder-length hair, holding a spotted owl plushie in one arm and a notebook in the other. A child frozen in time, while the world argued about what really happened to her. And Daniel? He was harder to categorize. Some praised him. Some blamed him. Some said he'd snapped, taken his daughter off-grid for good. Others thought he'd stumbled on something he wasn't supposed to see. By the end of that week, 2 facts remained. The forest hadn't given up a single clue, and the internet wouldn't stop looking for monsters. It was a park ranger named Jeff Halpern who finally broke the lockbox in Daniel McCrae's glove compartment. They weren't expecting much. Maybe car registration, insurance papers, or spare maps. What they found was a black moleskin notebook, battered and water-stained at the corners but intact. Inside, Daniel's handwriting, tight, deliberate, almost obsessive. The first pages were routine: dates, notes about hiking mileage, weather conditions, a packing list. But halfway through, the tone shifted. The entries grew shorter, fractured, more like whispers than words. July 2nd, trees feel closer at night. July 4th, something moved behind our tent, not wind. July 5th, Sophie says she hears it too. We don't camp twice in the same spot now. July 7th, I saw it, just for a second, between the trees, not a bear. July 8th, not alone out here. Then, scrawled sideways in the margin, I see them in the trees. Investigators went still. There were no signs that Daniel had ever camped in this area before July 10th, but these entries were dated days before that. Were they written in preparation for the trip? Or had he been there earlier, scouting? Another note read, Sophie heard the whistling again last night. She cried in her sleep. On the final page, we're not alone out here. It wasn't evidence, not in the traditional sense. No coordinates, no map, just paranoia, written in black ink on white paper. Or was it something else? Experts weighed in. A forensic psychologist suggested early-stage delusion, the possibility that Daniel was experiencing a paranoid episode linked to stress or untreated PTSD. But the tone wasn't manic. It wasn't rambling. It was focused, controlled, as if he believed every word. The journal reopened the case in a new direction. Was Daniel fleeing something or tracking it? Family members insisted he wasn't mentally unstable. Sophie's mother said he was the most grounded man she'd ever known. But something had changed in those final days, something Daniel had chosen not to share, except in a notebook no one was meant to read. The forest hadn't just swallowed a father and daughter. It had absorbed their fear, and now it was echoing back. The more investigators searched, the more the details didn't add up. On paper, Daniel McCrae had done everything wrong. He hadn't signed in at any of the backcountry ranger stations. He hadn't registered a camping permit. There was no note left with family about which trail he was taking, no emergency contact list, no satellite tracker, not even a trip itinerary on his fridge. And for a man known to be methodical, that was strange. The trail to Tolmie Peak, while popular, connects to dozens of backcountry spurs, most unmarked, some long decommissioned. Without a permit or logbook entry, there was no way to trace Daniel's intended route. No way to know where he'd turned or why. Rangers initially chalked it up to oversight. Maybe he thought the area didn't require registration. Maybe he planned to stay only a night and didn't think it was necessary. But then the journal surfaced, and the question shifted. Why go off-grid? Why hide their trail? Was it paranoia or protection? More troubling still, there was evidence that Daniel had researched areas outside of mapped hiking zones. His home computer revealed Google Earth pins deep in unregulated forest, no trails, no shelters, just dense wilderness and a red dot labeled the Basin. Did Daniel know something others didn't? Or had something inside him unraveled, silently, fatally? Investigators interviewed friends, neighbors, his VA counselor. No one reported erratic behavior, no medication, no breakdowns. He'd been fine, focused, excited for the trip. But when pressed, one hiking buddy admitted that Daniel had recently grown strangely obsessed with the idea of isolation. He said the woods were the only place that still made sense, the man told police, that the world out here was too loud. No one knew what that meant, not really. What they did know was this: Daniel McCrae had deliberately avoided leaving a trail. Whether that meant he was hiding from something or searching for it was a question no one could answer. And somewhere in the trees, Sophie had followed him, willingly, trustingly. 2 sets of footprints vanished, and the forest remained silent as ever, refusing to give either one back. As days passed and no new evidence emerged, the case began to bend under its own weight. Search crews had found nothing, no campsite, no clothing, no remains. Just a car, a notebook, and an endless stretch of trees. With no hard facts, theories multiplied like moss in shadow. Theory 1, accident in remote terrain. Daniel and Sophie took a wrong turn, ended up on an unmarked trail, and succumbed to the elements: injury, exposure, dehydration. A simple explanation, a tragic one. But if that were true, where were the bodies? Rangers combed every logical route within a 12-mile radius. Not even a shoelace turned up. Theory 2, intentional disappearance. Daniel had pulled away from society. Maybe he wanted to start over. Raise Sophie off-grid, escape something personal or something bigger. But to vanish so cleanly, with no financial trail, no fake IDs, no vehicle movement, and a 10-year-old child in tow, it didn't fit. And then there was Theory 3, the one no one said out loud until they did. They weren't alone out there. Locals had whispered for years about something in those woods. Stories passed between park workers and old-timers, always with the same hook, the whistler, a sound heard in the distance, always faint, always just behind you. Some said it mimicked voices. Others claimed it was a wind that didn't move the trees. The legend said those who heard it would become disoriented, drawn off trail, lured deeper, and then they vanished. Skeptics laughed it off. Forests are loud, unpredictable. Whistles could be wind, birds, echo. But the stories kept coming. Quiet disappearances, missing time. Campers waking up miles from their last known location with no memory of how they got there. Now, Daniel's journal, Sophie hears it too. "We're not alone out here," was fueling the fire. Some rangers scoffed, others stopped laughing. "We've had search dogs refuse to go beyond certain tree lines," one said. "Just sit down and whine." Like they knew something we didn't. Was it just folklore or something more? 3 theories, 1 truth. And while the world argued over which made sense, Mount Rainier remained still, its trees watching, its secrets intact. Something had happened out there, and whatever it was, it had chosen to stay hidden. It was nearly a month after the disappearance when the drawing surfaced. Sophie's 4th grade art teacher, Mrs. Elena Robichaud, didn't think much of it at first. She kept a box of old student sketches in her classroom, sentimental keepsakes from past classes. She was sorting through them one afternoon when she saw Sophie's name scrawled in the bottom right corner of a crumpled sheet. The paper was rough-edged, the pencil work frantic. The sketch showed a forest. Not the kind you find in coloring books, but something darker. The trees were gnarled and uneven like claws reaching inward. Shadows were sketched between the trunks, figures vaguely human, with long limbs and hollow ovals where faces should have been. At the bottom of the drawing, in the handwriting of a 10-year-old, were the words, "Dad says it's just trees, but I see them." Mrs. Robichaud froze. She remembered Sophie well, quiet, observant, unusually thoughtful for her age. She loved birds and watercolor. Her usual artwork was sunny, filled with animals and color. This was something else entirely. The sketch had no date, but the teacher remembered Sophie giving it to her in late June, just a week or 2 before the camping trip. "It's just something I saw in my head," Sophie had said when asked. "I think it's from a dream." She hadn't smiled when she said it. Detectives collected the drawing the next day. It was entered into evidence, but not officially classified as useful. Kids draw strange things all the time, they said. It didn't prove anything. But behind closed doors, some investigators disagreed. The resemblance to Daniel's journal entries was disturbing. The timing was worse. And the idea that Sophie had seen something, whether in dreams or reality, gnawed at those who had spent time in the woods looking for her. One ranger, after seeing the sketch, quietly requested not to be assigned to the case again. It meant nothing. It meant everything. No one could say for sure if Sophie had been imagining shadows or predicting them. But whatever she'd seen or thought she saw, it followed her into the trees, and it hadn't let her go. The maps were wrong. That's what retired Ranger Bill Harwood said when he showed up unannounced at the Rainier field office in early August. He'd heard about the case on the radio, the names, the search efforts, the media noise, but what caught his attention was the location, Eunice Lake. "I know a trail that's not on any of your maps," he said, "and if they were heading toward Tolmie Lookout, they might have found it." The trail he spoke of wasn't official. It had once been a narrow maintenance route, decades old, used briefly for equipment access, before being abandoned in the late 90s after multiple landslides made it too dangerous. Over time it was deliberately erased from visitor maps, left to vanish under brush and time. But it still existed, barely. The entrance to the trail, according to Harwood, lay north of Eunice Lake, marked only by an old stump and a faint split in the undergrowth. You'd miss it if you weren't looking for it, and maybe even if you were. But to someone unfamiliar with the terrain, with the right lighting, it might look like a shortcut, a way back down, or worse, a trail that led somewhere. It was never searched during the initial rescue operation. The area had been deemed too unstable. Helicopter surveys couldn't see through the canopy, and ground teams had focused on more logical paths. No one expected a 10-year-old girl and her father to wander into a corridor known for landslides and deadfall. It wasn't on the maps. It wasn't supposed to be there. But Daniel had brought his own maps. And, according to GPS data recovered from his desktop computer, he'd looked at historical overlays, the kind that showed trails long gone, The theory gained traction fast. Maybe they'd reached Eunice Lake. Maybe they'd seen the lookout above them, realized it was farther than expected. Maybe Sophie was tired. Maybe the shortcut seemed like salvation. Or maybe something else had steered them toward it. By the end of the week, a small specialized team was sent to locate the forgotten trail. What they found at the entrance wasn't a trail marker. It was a child's mitten, faded blue, soaked by rain, lying face up in the mud, as if someone had dropped it deliberately, or left it behind as a sign. 6 months after Daniel and Sophie McCrae disappeared, winter settled over Mount Rainier like a shroud. Snow choked the trails, temperatures dropped. The trees stood still, silent, unwilling to give up their secrets. And with no new evidence, no sightings, and no remains, the National Park Service made it official. The search was suspended. The McCraes were declared presumed dead. It wasn't a decision made lightly. Over 500 hours of combined search time, hundreds of volunteers, dog teams, drones, helicopters. The forest had been combed section by section until winter forced everyone out. But the mountain gave nothing back, not even a bone. In January, a memorial was held in Tacoma. Friends gathered in the community center where Sophie had once presented a birdwatching project. Her classmates read poems. A slideshow flickered with images, Daniel holding Sophie on his shoulders near a waterfall, her grinning with marshmallows stuck to her fingers, both of them smiling at the summit of Mount Eleanor. People cried, people spoke, people let go. But Christine, Daniel's ex-wife and Sophie's mother, didn't. She stood in the back, hands clenched, face pale. To the others it looked like grief, but inside Christine was holding on to something else. Certainty. She didn't believe they were dead. She believed they were running. Christine told a family friend that Daniel had become distant in the final year. Paranoid. He'd changed the locks twice, bought backup solar chargers, canceled Sophie's school enrollment without telling her. Claimed he was preparing for something. At the time, Christine had written it off as post-service anxiety. Now she wondered if he'd known something, or if someone had been after them. She went to the police with her theory. They noted it, then shelved it. No evidence, no sightings, no case. Just a father and daughter who walked into the woods and never walked out. Officially, the file was closed. Unofficially, the questions had just begun. The story might have ended there, 2 more names on a long list of people swallowed by the American wilderness, but it didn't. Not once Lena Hart found it. Lena wasn't a cop, she wasn't a ranger, she was a podcaster. Her show, Where They Went, had a modest following. She covered cold cases with strange patterns, missing hikers, vanished travelers, disappearances that didn't quite make sense. When she read about Daniel and Sophie, something clicked. A decorated army medic, a child, no tracks, no gear, no goodbye. It didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like a code. Lena started with Daniel's military record, honorable discharge, tours in Afghanistan, army medic, trauma specialist. She spoke with 2 of his former squad mates, both hesitant, both clearly still loyal. One dismissed the case as an accident. Dan was a good dad. He wouldn't hurt that girl. He probably just took a wrong turn. But the second paused before answering, then said something she couldn't shake. He used to talk about mountains. Said the higher you go, the weirder the air gets, like radio interference, but in your head. He said certain places mess with signal, human signal. Lena asked him to clarify. I thought he was talking about altitude sickness. Now I'm not so sure. That night Lena reread Daniel's journal excerpts. We're not alone out here. Sophie hears it too. She pulled up maps of the Rainier backcountry, looked at overlay data, topographical distortions, fault lines, places where GPS routinely failed, places where the McCraes had last been seen. She wasn't a conspiracy theorist. She wasn't here for aliens or forest spirits. But she believed patterns meant something. And there was a pattern here, not just the McCraes. Other disappearances, similar locations, similar gaps, similar silences. Lena packed her gear, booked a cabin near the park boundary, and prepared to follow Daniel's last known path, step for step. She didn't know what she'd find. But whatever had swallowed the McCraes hadn't left a trace, and that to her meant it was hiding on purpose. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday in September, when Lena Hart met with the lead park investigator who had quietly held on to some of Daniel McCrae's personal effects. Most had already been cataloged, stored, or returned to the family. But the journal? It was still sitting in a locked drawer at the ranger station, alongside something else, a folded, hand-annotated topographical hiking map. The map wasn't standard issue. It wasn't one you'd pick up at the visitor center or buy in the gift shop. It had been printed off a website offering historical overlays of Washington wilderness trails, some long decommissioned. Daniel had drawn on it, lines in pencil, arrows, circles, even a date. Lena unfolded it on the ranger's desk, her eyes scanning the path from Mowich Lake to Tolmy Peak. At first glance, it followed the expected route. Then she saw the detour. About a quarter-mile north of Eunice Lake, Daniel had drawn a thin, handwritten line, almost like a spider's thread, leading off the main trail and winding into unmarked terrain. At the end of it, in faded black ink, one word: the Basin. It didn't appear on any official map. No ranger she spoke to recognized the name. It wasn't a lake. It wasn't a registered camp. A search of the U.S. Geological Survey database turned up nothing. But next to the word was a small, square box Daniel had drawn, almost like a structure or landmark. And beside that, a note: old access path, check elevation, steep drop west. Lena traced the line again, this time with her fingertip. The detour would have taken them far off the established routes, into dense, sloping forest, where even satellite coverage thinned out. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. Daniel had planned to go there. But why? What was in the basin that didn't belong on any map? Lena uploaded the image to her research files and began building a digital reconstruction of the path. It would take time, more than she had in a single trip. But she was close. She could feel it, close to whatever Daniel was chasing or fleeing from. The wrong map didn't show where he got lost. It showed where he was going. It was November 3rd, 2024, a quiet Sunday morning in the shadow of Mount Rainier. Jeremy Faulkner, an amateur landscape photographer from Olympia, had taken the weekend to hike solo, away from the noise, the job, the news, the hum of things that never stopped. He liked to find spots off the beaten path where the trees still felt wild and the air pressed in close. He was hiking north of Eunice Lake, bushwhacking through undergrowth most tourists would never attempt. A steep incline had slowed his pace, forcing him to grip roots and duck fallen limbs. That's when he noticed something odd. A splash of pink half buried under moss and decaying leaves. At first he thought it was garbage, but when he knelt down and brushed away the debris, he found it wasn't trash. It was a children's hiking boot. Small, weathered, one of the rubber eyelets torn out, the fabric bleached by time and rain. He stared at it for a long time before pulling out his phone. No service. He marked the GPS coordinates, took photos, and kept walking, cautiously now, glancing at every tree, every shadow. Less than 100 feet away, just past a line of moss-covered stones, he heard something odd. A faint clinking, rhythmic, like chimes, but not from wood or glass. He followed the sound. Hanging from the low branch of a fir tree was a makeshift wind chime, tied together with twine and fishing line. Metal spoons, rusted but intact, clinked softly in the wind. From the center dangled a baby bell, the kind sewn into infant toys, barely audible in the cold air. Jeremy stepped back, heart in his throat. It didn't feel like something left by a camper. It felt like a signal, a marker, or maybe a warning. He took more photos, then turned around and retraced his steps, boot shaking in one hand, wind chime echoing behind him like a memory trying not to fade. By nightfall, his report had reached the authorities. Within 24 hours, it reached the McCrae file. The boot matched the brand Sophie was last seen wearing, and for the first time in over a year, Mount Rainier whispered something back. Not words, but proof. Jeremy Faulkner didn't go back up the way he came. Something about the boot, the wind chime, the bell, it rattled him. Instead, he decided to loop downhill, hoping to find a trail, or at least a clearing, where he could regain his bearings. That's when he found it. Roughly 200 yards below the chime, tucked behind a curtain of ferns and wind-felled timber, was what once had been a campsite, if you could still call it that. The ground was uneven, overgrown, a collapsed tarp, partially buried under pine needles, flapped weakly in the breeze. Its guy lines were frayed like they'd been torn, not cut. Nearby sat a tent, or the remains of one, torn along one side, mesh shredded, fabric eaten by mold. The skeletal frame was bent inward like it had been crushed from above. Around the site, time had chewed through everything: decomposed food packaging, a rust-stained metal mug, faded Ziploc bags disintegrating in the mud. But some things had lasted. Under the tarp, half covered in soil and pine cones, Jeremy found a weather-damaged teddy bear, its left eye missing, the fabric stiff with water damage. Beside it, a child's sweater, blue with faded white stars, still mostly intact. He didn't touch anything. Instead, he leaned into the tent, ducking beneath the shredded flap to peer inside. That's where he saw the writing. On the interior tent wall, scrawled in black marker, shaky, hurried, almost scratched into the fabric, "They only come at night." Jeremy stumbled backward, heart pounding. He didn't know what he'd just walked into, but this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a casual overnight gone wrong. This was a warning. He dropped a pin on his GPS, backed away, and took only what mattered: the photographs, the boot, the sweater, and the memory of that message, still echoing in his mind as he hiked back into the thinning light. That night, Jeremy turned over the images to the local sheriff's office. Within 18 hours, a full recovery team was en route. They weren't calling it a search anymore. Now it was a crime scene. The response was immediate. By sunrise on November 5th, a multi-agency recovery team assembled at Mowich Lake Trailhead. Forest Service rangers, forensic analysts, cadaver dogs, and cold case investigators all converged on the mountain with a new mission: find out what happened at that camp. The terrain was brutal. Even with GPS, the route to the site took nearly 6 hours through unstable ground, heavy overgrowth, and steep elevation shifts. But when they arrived, there was no doubt. It was the same location Jeremy had marked. The teddy bear, the tarp, the sweater, all there, and something else. Behind the ruined tent, partially buried under leaves and dirt, a cadaver dog stopped, whined, pawed the ground. An hour later, they found the first remains, partial skeletal fragments, sun-bleached and fragile. Forensic teams marked the area, documenting every twig and stone. Dental records confirmed the identity within 48 hours. Daniel McCrae. He had died here. Alone or not alone, they didn't know yet. But this wasn't a case of a man walking away with his daughter. This was a man who had died trying to protect her. The condition of the campsite, the positioning of the remains, the torn tent, it told a story no one wanted to read. But there was no sign of Sophie. Not in the clearing, not in the ravine below, not in the trees. Until a ranger, sweeping the surrounding perimeter, spotted something lodged between two boulders about 50 feet from the camp, a small, mud-caked object with faded purple straps. A child's backpack. It was zipped shut. Inside, a crushed granola bar, a waterlogged field notebook, a small plastic flashlight, and a voice recorder, the cheap, kid-friendly kind with big red buttons and a cracked screen. It was intact. They didn't press play in the woods. They waited. That night, back at base, the lead investigator hit the button, and Sophie McCrae's voice filled the room. Faint, quiet, recorded through tears. "Daddy's asleep. I don't know if he's okay. There was noise again. I think they're still out there. I hear them when it's dark. I don't want to go to sleep anymore." The tape clicked off. No one spoke. The mountains had finally spoken, and the voice they gave back was Sophie's. The recorder was sent to the Washington State Crime Lab within hours. The plastic was cracked, water had seeped into the buttons, and the speaker had corroded slightly. But the internal memory card was intact. It held 3 recordings, 2 were short, muffled sounds, indistinct whispers, dead air. The third was 1 minute, 43 seconds long. Audio technicians enhanced it, cleaned the static, pulled Sophie's voice forward from the hiss of wind, rain, and distant noise. The first 20 seconds are quiet, just Sophie breathing. Then, her voice, small, uncertain. "It's cold. Daddy says it's okay, but I hear it again." A long pause. That whistling. It's closer now. You can hear her shifting, maybe wrapping the blanket tighter, maybe turning towards something outside the tent. "I think they're walking around the trees. I can't see them, but I know they're there." The wind picks up. Then, barely audible in the background, a soft, rhythmic whistle. Not a bird, not wind. Something too deliberate, too human. The next 30 seconds are silence, no speaking. Just Sophie's breath, unsteady. The faint sound of something tapping, spoons, perhaps, swinging on their string. Then, the final moments. She whispers now, almost inaudible. "It's looking at me." A soft whimper, then a click. The audio ends. No screaming, no crash, just a child's voice, scared but composed, and the quiet dread of someone who knows they are no longer alone. Investigators looped the file for hours. Analysts, child psychologists, sound engineers, none could explain the tone of that whistle or the clarity of Sophie's fear. She wasn't lost. She was being watched. The discovery of Daniel's remains and the recording refocused everything. This wasn't just recovery anymore. This was pursuit. Cadaver dogs, once pulled from the field months earlier, were flown back in. Specially trained to pick up the faintest traces of scent, they were deployed near the remains and slowly widened their search radius. It took hours. Then one of the dogs, Echo, a 6-year-old bloodhound, alerted. Nose down, tail stiff. She veered uphill, away from the collapsed tent, and into thick undergrowth that hadn't been searched before. There, rangers found the first clue, a scrap of purple cloth snagged on a bramble. 15 feet farther, a blue hair ribbon tied carefully around a thin pine branch. And another, 20 yards beyond that, a second ribbon, this one pink. It wasn't random. They were trail markers, not placed by accident, but deliberately. The spacing, the visibility, just enough to catch the eye of someone who knew what to look for. They followed the trail uphill, slow, methodical, each step heavier than the last. Sophie had moved away from the camp, not toward safety, and yet she'd marked her path like breadcrumbs in the dark. The ribbons ended at a stone outcropping near the edge of a deep ravine. No footprints, no blood, just an empty spot where someone might have stood and stared out into nothing. Down below, the ravine dropped almost 60 feet, choked with rocks and brush. No way down without ropes, no sign she'd fallen. But one ranger noticed something else. Carved into the mossy stone, faint but unmistakable, were finger marks, drag lines in the green fuzz, as if someone had knelt here and held on. There was no body, no clothing, just wind, trees, and the feeling that someone had been here and waited. The question now wasn't just where Sophie had gone, it was why she'd stopped there. And what, if anything, had met her at the edge. They almost missed it. The ribbon, blue, faded, tied delicately to the pine branch near the outcropping, was collected as evidence along with the others. But when it reached the lab in Olympia, something unexpected surfaced. It still carried trace skin oil. Sophie's DNA was present. That wasn't surprising. But what stunned analysts was the condition of the material. The oil hadn't degraded in the way expected after 16 months of exposure. It was intact, recent. The lab tech called the lead investigator immediately. "This wasn't tied there a year ago," she said, "at most 3, maybe 4 weeks. It didn't make sense. The recovery team had just been in the area. Could they have missed her by a matter of days? Had she been watching them from the woods? If that ribbon was recent, then someone, Sophie, had been alive long after her father's confirmed death. But how? No food, no supplies, no shelter. A 10-year-old girl surviving alone for over a year in one of the harshest wilderness zones in the Pacific Northwest? It defied logic. Unless she hadn't been alone. The theory ignited like wildfire. Not with the public yet, But among those close to the case, investigators, rangers, even volunteers who had walked those trails themselves, they began asking terrifying questions. Was someone keeping her alive? Had she escaped captivity and returned to leave the ribbon? Was she trying to communicate? Or was something else out there? A team returned to the outcropping a week later with search dogs and thermal drones. They found nothing. No footprints, no heat signatures, no discarded food wrappers, just more silence. And yet, the science didn't lie. The ribbon was fresh, and it had been tied by Sophie. If she was out there, alive, it meant something far more terrifying than death had happened in those woods. It meant she had learned how to hide. And maybe she had a reason not to come back. The McCrae case was officially reopened in early December. New evidence, new timeline, new questions, the kind that don't fit neatly into case files or press releases. Daniel McCrae's death was no longer viewed as a simple wilderness accident. His behavior before the trip, the maps, the journal, the paranoid whispers, suddenly, all of it made a different kind of sense. Had he been hiding from someone? Had he brought Sophie here not for a camping trip, but as a last resort? And if so, what had found them? Investigators began revisiting witness statements from years past. Hikers who reported strange sounds near the tree line. Campers who had heard something moving around the tents at night. And then there was the sound mentioned in both Daniel's journal and Sophie's recorder. The whistler. A local myth, yes. But now it had a body count, or at least part of one. Theories began piling up again, faster this time, sharper. Some pointed fingers at off-grid survivalists. Others whispered about cults, secret bunkers, even underground networks of people living beyond civilization. But a smaller, quieter group started asking a question no one wanted to say out loud. What if it wasn't human? What if the whistler was real? What if Sophie hadn't just survived the forest, but adapted to it? The media got wind of the reopened case. Old footage of the wind chime, the tent, the scrawled message, "They only come at night," began surfacing again. But the story didn't end there. On January 4th, 2025, a solo hiker named Morgan Dade set out to photograph snowfall near Eunice Lake. Her GPS log shows she ventured slightly north of the marked trail. She stopped at 2:13 p.m., took a picture of the frozen basin, and recorded an audio note on her phone. She uploaded it later that night, casually, to a hiking forum. The caption read, "Thought I was alone. Then I heard this." The clip is 9 seconds long. Wind, snow, silence. Then a faint whistle, high, sharp, deliberate. And in the last second, as Morgan turns, the crunch of her boots reveals small footprints in the fresh mud beside her own. Just one set, barefoot, heading uphill. The forest once again had something to say. And this time it wasn't done whispering. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.